We might as well post it up again. Thank you. Titus 1, 5 through 16. So, second study in Titus. Let's talk, do a little bit of review. Book of Titus. Who wrote it? Paul, right.
Paul.
Verse 1. Literally
Yeah.
the first word in the verse, Paul. Exactly. So he signs his name at the top. He's like, hey, I'm Paul. I'm writing this letter. Who's he writing it to?
I want to say Titus.
You would be on point. Exactly. He is writing it to Titus. Who is Titus?
A man in Crete.
He is a man in Crete.
Shoot.
Do we know anything about Titus outside of this book?
Outside of this? No, I don't know.
So I Titus actually does not appear in the book of Acts, but he is mentioned in the book of Second Corinthians. Paul sends Titus to address some concerns and to manage the church for a short period of time in the book of Second Corinthians. So Titus clearly, because we're going to see once we get into the passage tonight, Titus is a man that Paul, he states that Titus in verse 4, Wiseret covered this last week, that Titus was Paul's true son in the common faith. And what he means by that is that Paul very likely led Titus to Christ. He was the man that led Titus to conversion. I read some stuff interesting this week, some theories as to maybe possibly some more stuff about Titus unconfirmed. I read a very interesting one that said that there was a theory that Titus might have been Luke's brother. Now, I have no empirical evidence, absolutely nothing to back that up. I find it a fascinating, kind of an interesting theory, but there's nothing that as far as I know that would back that up. But it is interesting that they both traveled with Paul, so who knows? But Titus was clearly a man that Paul trusted. He sent him to the city of Corinth to oversee the church there. And then, after doing some missionary work on the island of Crete, he leaves Titus here again with certain orders to perform actions on the island of Crete. So clearly, Titus is a man that Paul views as very responsible, a man that he can trust with some tasks. All right. So that's where we're at. We are writing a letter to Titus, this man that Paul led to Christ, and he's left him on the island of Crete to help establish and set up some rules and some order in the church. Okay? Any questions before we really get going? We good? Titus is being handed a mop. Well, I would put forth a different tool, but we'll cover that in a second. Can I get someone to read verses 5 through 9? Titus chapter 1.
I'll start us off if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I'm reading KJV. Is that okay? Or would
That's
you like
fine.
new KJV?
Yep, you're fine.
All right. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I had appointed thee. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly, for a bishop must be blameless, as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word, as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so here we have Paul's express purpose for Titus on the island of Crete. So he says, look, I ask that you would set in order what remains and appoint elders, bishops, in every city as I told you. So this is Paul reiterating. He's already told Titus, but he's like, you can put it down in writing and that lasts a little bit longer than saying it to someone. So let's just double back so that we have this in writing. If anybody questions Titus as to, who put you in charge, he has an official letter right here that he can read to the churches, show the elders or whoever's in charge, and be like, look, Paul wrote this and he put me in charge. All right. So we have all of this set up. Now, Tess said that Paul is handing Titus a mop to kind of clean things up. I would submit that he didn't hand him a mop, but he handed him more of a surgical tool. Because here in verse 5, we have a very specific Greek word used. Because Paul says that he plans to he wants Titus to set things in order. That is a very, very precise Greek word that he uses there. Does anybody know what the Greek word is for set things in order? That's used right there. No. That looks distinctly yeah. I was like, that looks distinctly German.
Epidiorthu.
Yes, it is. I'll put it in chat. Epidiortho. There you go. And for the eagle-eyed among you, you may be able to look at the second half of that word and see this, like orthodontist, orthopedist.
Mm,
It is. Yeah, back to the toothache. Leave it alone. I'm trying to leave
no,
it alone. Orthodoxy.
what he's
Yes.
focused on.
Orthos is
Ah,
a Greek root that is Luke would have been very familiar with this word because it literally refers to the setting of bone. Like if you have someone who has broken a bone, you would use the term orthos to talk about putting it back, reset it, make it so that it's in proper position. That's what you go
yeah, the bracelets.
yeah, exactly. If you go to an orthodontist and your teeth are crooked, you get braces so that they put them so that they're straight. Exactly. And so that's where we get this word, which I find as really cool that Paul is telling him, look, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take these things that are crooked, these things that aren't in order, these things that when we were in Crete we found to be lacking or not structurally proper. And I am entrusting you with the task to put these things in order. And then he details how he wants him to do this. He starts off, he says, I want you to appoint elders in every city as I directed you. And then he gives qualifications for these elders. Now, these elders, I think the King James uses the term bishop, if I remember correctly. Uh,
Nope. It's
nope.
elders in
Does the elders? Okay.
but
Some
he does say
translations use.
bishop and seven.
Okay. Yeah. Some translations use bishop. Some use elders. They're mostly the same interchangeable. But it's generally referring to a pastor. Now, I don't have it with me because I spent most of my afternoon kind of wondering if I was going to be able to teach tonight. But if you see the island of Crete, it's not a terribly small island. It's not like Malta, which was basically a speck on a map. Crete is a substantial island, but it's known for having a bunch of different cities all around its edge, coastal cities because it was known for ports. Centrally located Mediterranean city, and so naturally a lot of ships would go there and dock, and they were famous for trade and whatnot. So Crete was very what was known as having a bunch of cities, a bunch of places where people could centralize and live. And this was a problem because if you have a bunch of people living in a bunch of different places, it's hard for them to necessarily gather. And so what Paul is asking Titus to do is he says, "Hey, every place needs to have at least one person ordained. Every one of these churches, whether they be in a house or a larger congregation, needs to have someone overseeing them." I read a really good quote from one of the commentaries I was looking at that says, "People rarely exceed or grow beyond their leader." So what you are looking for is a man that will lead well and lead the people strongly, lead with strength, lead into the future, allow them to grow and flourish. Someone that will lead well and inspire those under him. Yeah. Makes sense so far?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm getting it.
Okay, nobody says no, so we're good. Please don't let me leave you behind. Oh, Cass is waving a hand, I think.
When he says elders in every city, is he saying multiple elders in each city? Or
Not
just
necessarily. So I'm glad you brought this up because this was something that came up. He's not necessarily saying that there should be multiple elders in every city. So take for instance, let's say that there are just for funsies, let's say that there is a small township on the western half of Crete. I don't know if that's a real place, but let's just say that it is. And in the small township, there are 5 believers. Okay? Now, would you need to have multiple elders or pastors for this group of 5 believers that are meeting together?
no,
I would
don't
agree.
see that.
I'd say that no, you don't need that because that's over management. What I think is being said here by Paul isn't that you need to have multiples for each congregation, but that you should have at least one at every congregation. Because every congregation needs to have a pastor, an overseer. And so I think Paul is telling Titus here, I want you to go around and find these congregations, consult with them, and find from among them someone that can stand up as their leader, and then you train them. You train them. You find people of proper standing, which he will outline in the next few verses. Then he says, I want you to create from among them these leadership positions, and I want you to help them to be able to shepherd their particular flocks wherever they are. That makes sense. No confirmation that that was good.
Yes, it does make sense.
Okay, cool. All right. I see typing. Ty, is it okay if I go on ahead? Oh, wait, there we go. Our churches have many elders, one bishop. Excuse the New Testament uses terms interchangeably. Yes, there are different terms used, but generally speaking, especially here, because we'll see in a second. Um, yes, yes, especially here, that there is a problem within Crete that Paul is particularly aware of, and he wants to prevent things from being from getting out of hand. We'll cover that in probably about 4 verses. So let's move
Yeah.
on. So he's oh, sorry. Does somebody have a comment? Nope. Okay. So let's go over the qualification. So looking at reading from the ESV. So he says, first thing he says is if anybody is above reproach. Well, that's a great start, isn't it? Is anyone here above reproach? Just curious.
Utter relief to not be qualified.
Yeah. It's like it's an awesome thing, you know. Paul's writing to Titus. He says, "Hey, listen, I want you to appoint above reproach." Titus is like, "I don't think there's anybody like that in the world." Paul's like, "Cool, didn't ask, find them."
Mhm.
Now, let's be perfectly real. There was one perfect being throughout the entirety of human history. Okay? So, I don't think Paul is saying here that you're to find someone who is perfect. But above reproach, the usage here is it it means that there is nothing that someone can specifically point to that they are lacking in their life, some area where they would be that would be an obvious disqualification. Like, say, just to use an example for the Cretans, which we'll see in a second, he says, what about Joe over here? Would Joe be a good elder? And somebody within the congregation will go, I know that Joe cheats on his taxes. Let's just say that. That's a problem. That would disqualify Joe from being an elder. And he says, well, what about Steve over here? And they're like, well, Steve has a lying problem. It's not that they don't mess up, because obviously we're all sinners. We're all fallen creatures in a cursed world. but it is something that these men that are to be appointed as elders are in a constant state of pursuing holiness. There is no area where they are constantly falling, where there is a lack, where there is a uh, a distinct deficiency of maturity.
Hmm.
I'm just looking at what the chat says. Someone of good character. You trust them to babysit your kid and return them in decent health. Borrow your car and not return it totaled and with a full gas tank. It's a good way of putting it. These are guys that, like we talked about Titus, they're trustworthy, they're responsible, but they're also seeking the right things. They are not one that's given to falling in a particular area. They don't show weakness. They show strength against. Okay, does it make sense? I don't want to spend too long on these because there are a lot of these. I don't want to make sure everybody is on board. I don't want to leave anybody behind. All right.
Yeah, great.
So above reproach, sorry, I heard something.
You're doing great.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
going. Keep it up.
Above reproach,
Keep
the
going.
husband of one wife. I know there's going to be controversy in regard to this one. This is a fun one. Let me just say that the best reading that I saw in covering this one is it is a one woman man.
Mhm.
And I was like, I don't think I could do much better than that description. I think that's a darn good one.
Mhm.
In Africa, this would be an issue. Probably. Yeah, I can think of a few places where this might be an issue.
There's a lot of places, countries
Yeah,
in Africa.
there are a lot of places this would be an issue, and for a lot of different reasons. Yep. Next one. His children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. Yee. What do you guys think about that?
Demonstration of his talent for leadership.
Yeah, exactly. You lead your family well, probably going to be able to lead others congregation well as well. It's a demonstration of their own ability. You don't want to you don't want to look at this guy and be like, hey, this kid is living in open rebellion to his authority. Can we really trust him to lead people that aren't? For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. There's that same terminology again. He is God's steward. I think there's a few things covered. So when we talk about a steward, what are we usually referring to? Steadfast. But in what matters do we think of? When we hear the word steward, what are they usually stewards of? Yes,
Property?
exactly, Kes. Yeah, usually taking care of goods, property, like an estate, something
Some
like that.
lands,
It's
houses. Yeah.
it's their possession. And so on the one hand, I would say this is a call to someone who is financially stable, right? This is someone who is able to take care of their home, like a reflection of talking about their kids, but this is someone who's able to take care of their own possessions and manage their household with their finances well, but also moving forward, continuing through these verses, we're going to see that it's someone who is a good steward of their time, but also of their own abilities and their oh shoot, I had the word and then it died. There it went. Goodbye. Someone comes up
Maybe
with
it's in
it.
the Greek.
What is it in the Greek? Great question. I don't have it written down.
Yeah.
um, pull out the app real quick. Reliable, not impulsive. That's a good way of putting it. With their gifts, with their virtues. I think that's what I was. Someone who is in control of their emotions, their emotional state, their spiritual state, and then can manage those well to those people around me. Because let's face it, you guys know your pastors, and your pastors are very, very, very busy men. Think about all that a pastor does. We usually only see the pastor when he's preaching or when you particularly need something from him, right? But think pastors have lots of duties. They have to teach, they have to manage the entire church, they have to oversee many people. I know that personally, my pastor, we have lots of pastors in my church because I go to a larger church, but they are constantly going visiting the sick, visiting those who are in the hospital, caretaking for funerals, overseeing weddings. There's so many things that a pastor has to do. And if you can't manage all of your responsibilities, then you shouldn't be a pastor in the first place. And so this is something else that is important to Paul that Titus looked for in these men that he's asking him to appoint. Says he's not I have my ESV up on the monitor, and then I have my NASB in front of me because it's my study Bible. So forgive me if I read from something that's not guys. But he says he's not supposed to be arrogant, quick-tempered, and definitely not a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain. Now, these are very interesting things to note because if you remember back at the beginning of or at the end of verse 5, it says, hey, this guy should be above reproach. And then you come down here to verse 7, it's like he shouldn't be arrogant or quick tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy. And it's like, feel like we covered that. So why would Paul reference this again here? Guess. Paul gives a list of every reason that pastors get in the news. Yikes. That's whew.
That's pretty much
I'm like that.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's whew.
That's why you pick them
Wise Rat
for
I
not
had a
temperate
question.
things.
Yeah.
What was Wise Rat's question?
What was Wise
Yeah,
Rat's
what was
question?
yours?
I'll save it
I
for
meant.
after. I'll save it for after study.
Oh,
I can
okay.
actually do
Okay.
after study this time because since tomorrow's the 4th, I got the day off. So
Yes.
Woo!
Okay, I'll just
Okay.
remember what verse it
Well,
was about.
yeah, we'll put that one on the back burner. We'll come back to it for the after study. Also, hi YouTube. If you're watching this, we would love to have you join us in real time so you can actually attend the after study. Thanks. Promo over.
Hmm.
All right. So Paul would mention this. Thanks, Phoenix. But Paul is likely mentioning this here because, again, we're going to draw a contrast. Paul is setting up, these are what men should not be doing. Just as a heads up, you might find this a bit amongst the people in Crete. And we referenced this 2 weeks ago when we were here. We'll cover it in a little bit. Okay? Any questions? Are we good? Like we're good. All right. So all the way down through verse 7 at this point, we basically been covering things that these guys should not do. Don't have rebellious kids. Don't be greedy. Don't be violent. Don't be a drunk. Don't be arrogant. All of these things. It's like, no, 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 no. Now, Paul's going to break into, okay, these are the things that we should be looking for. All right. These are the hallmarks of a man that will step in and can honorably and responsibly fill the role of an elder for these new believers on Crete. He says he should be hospitable. Okay? So a man that is open, accepting, friendly. A lover of good. I don't think I need to expound on. Self-controlled, in contrast to the idea of the greed that we were talking about before, greedy or a drunk. This is a man who is controlled. He is able to temper himself and doesn't fly off the handle or allow himself to be controlled by some other outside force. He's not like addicted to something or whatnot. He is that is, if you're familiar with the idea of meekness, that strength under control, this is a good parallel to that. He's upright. He is holy. And we've spoken about that one. No one's perfect, but they are in constant pursuit of holiness. There is this state, this idea of maturity about them. And it's not just, adult maturity, but it's holy maturity. And he's disciplined. He can set himself to a task. He's not one that gets distracted. He's focused. And what he sets his mind to, he will pursue. This sounds like a pretty good guy, right? Excellent. Excellent, Ty Guy. These are qualifications that Titus is to look for in these men that he is going to set up as elders. It would be irresponsible of Paul to tell Titus to look for these kinds of men without understanding or without believing that Titus was one of those men already. Excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up. I was gonna make mention of it, but I'm glad you put it out there. Well done. Yes. What would hospitable mean in ancient Greco-Roman culture? Talking to people, inviting them over frequently. I'll be honest, that's also an excellent question and one to which I am not fully qualified to answer. I would have to talk to Unger because he likely knows. um, you know what? Let's we'll pull this back open. Let's find out what the Greek word is and see if we can get any clues from that.
Yes.
Uh,
Philoxenos.
uh, oh, now that is an interesting word. I think I remember looking this up. So that's the word that's used there. It literally means a lover of hospitality. That's how the scriptures translate it. But if you kind of break that down, some of you may recognize the first half of that, philo. That's love. That's that brotherly love that we talk about. It's how Philadelphia gets its name. The phileo love. But Xenos, anybody that's familiar with etymology and the study of words. Yes, wise rat,
Cheers.
a lover of aliens. Now that sounds weird to put it that way. So let's put it in slightly more stop. If you've ever been to Philadelphia, you will know that that is not true. Um, but let's put it in slightly more modern terms. Let's not call him a lover of aliens. This is a lover of strangers, lover of outsiders. This is a person who is welcoming and looks for opportunities to demonstrate hospitality to those that he may not be familiar with. He's not one that's turning people away just because, to be honest, because they're weird or because they're different. He's looking for an opportunity to be hospitable. Why? Because that's scripture. It is not God's will that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. I think that's a good way of putting it, Phoenix. Welcoming to the strange. Yeah, Kies on point. Not just friendly to friends, but someone who extends themselves to travelers. And even going further, yeah, Crete is jam packed with. That wasn't something that I had marked down, but that's an excellent point. Again, Crete is the central hub for trade in the Mediterranean. You're going to see a ton of people, and so if you have someone in town, likely from heaven only knows where, you're covering space from all the way out in Spain and such to Egypt and Israel. These are vastly different distances, but you should be welcoming to whomever comes. They're all souls that need the gospel. And I think, Kes, going back to your statement, you said not just friendly to friends, because doesn't Jesus talk about that on the Sermon on the Mount?
Yes.
Yeah, when he says that if you only love your brother, what more do you do than anyone else? Don't the tax collectors do the same thing? This is literally just following after what Jesus said right there. He says, "Love your enemies. Pray for those that persecute you." Different direction, but it's the same idea.
It's because everyone's a child of God.
Everyone is a soul that needs Christ. Turning them away, it's not what Christ did. He died for the whole planet. Good stuff.
Thank you for the tangent.
Reminds me of that bishop in Les Miserables, first part
Been
of
a
the book.
long
That's all I read. The book,
is.
but it was a great story, a chapter part of the book where the bishop is generous with the guy who robs him. And he changes his life. He says,
Read
I
that.
purchased you for Christ. But he didn't know the guy. He just kind of
Right.
knows and cares about all the people that come to see him.
Yes. Oh wait. No, we haven't. I'm sorry. That was the next one. So,
Oh.
must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught. Once again, highlighting Titus's responsibility to teach these guys. Because you can find someone who has ability or who characterizes these traits, but something else that is very important, and I apologize if you guys hear the booms out in the background. We have people who like to celebrate the 4th a little early. Um, but they have to be able to be taught.
Yeah.
They have to be willing to grow. And so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, so that he needs to be able to learn so that he can be steadfast, have a firm foundation that he's built upon, so that he can teach others, but also to rebuke those who contradict. So we have this twofold idea branching off this one. So he says you need to be able to be taught so that you can have a good firm foundation. And you need to have a good foundation so that you can then teach. That's important. But then so you can also rebuke those that are teaching something that is contrary. There's two sides. There is this benefit. If you go to Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, right? This is exactly that. So you have the doctrine and the instruction in righteousness, those are more of the positive side, and then the reproof and correction are more the negative side. So you are countering the bad and encouraging the good. Now, this is where Paul is going to take a little bit of a focus, and we're going to detour and we're going to talk about the bad that we are countering here. With that in mind, let's get someone, and I see you typing, Phoenix. I promise you keep typing. We'll reference it, or we'll get to it when you're done. Can I get someone to, if I could type, that would help immensely. If I could get someone to read verses 10 through 16, Titus chapter 1.
On you. Who's gonna do it?
No one else will. I'll do it. Oh, Wise Rat says he can. If you would like to, it is all yours.
Excuse me. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting the whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, and not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. To the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled and the unbelieving nothing is pure. But both their put But both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work.
Geez, Paul, why don't you tell us how you really feel? Thank you, Wise Rat. All right. So we've spent the last 4 verses talking about the qualifications of these elders. And now we're going to look at why these elders are so needed because we have these other people, both in leadership positions and not and just kind of the more common folk surrounding them that are problematic, to say the least.
But you're right when you say G's, because G's stands for Jesus.
Correct.
That's how he feels, right?
Yeah, what is Paul went to some places and Paul encountered so much resistance. And it's like I'm convinced the man, like, he would look at what we're going through today and be like, "Yep, I saw that," and he can tell you exactly where he saw it. He encountered every kind of resistance to the gospel. All right. So he says, "There are those who are insubordinate." What on earth does that mean? I say ulterior motives in your sense. In fairness, I don't think that's even 9 or 10 sentences. I'm pretty sure Paul uses 3. Paul, the undisputed master of the run-on sentence.
I was gonna say, are we counting the commas or no?
Okay, I'll pull up the apotactos. Insubordinate. I should probably put the numbers in there.
Yep. So these are you may if you've heard the term insubordination, usually one that's used in the military for someone that won't follow orders, right? They won't submit. They are very stubborn, might be say. Excellent way of putting it, Kiss. Yeah, they are the opposite of let everything be done in decently and in order. Yeah. So these are guys that will not submit to authority. Now, what kind of authority are we looking? Are we referencing?
Mm. Authority of the priesthood and
Yeah,
God.
I would say the spiritual authority because Paul, remember when he starts chapter 1, he names himself and he uses kind of his title card. He starts every one of his epistles referring himself as a bondservant of God, but he also names himself an apostle of Jesus Christ. That's his credentials. He is an apostle. That is a leadership role ordained by God to be a leader within his church. And so Paul is stating his authority under the head of Christ. And as that authority, as this apostle, he sets Titus to establish these elders. But then he says, now look, there are going to be guys that are going to be insubordinate. That's what we're calling them. The NASB here says that they are rebellious men. These are guys that will not submit to authority. Now, it may be true that they may have been rebellious in the grander, towards government or certain other authorities. But I think Paul is really focusing here because he is talking about the scope of the church and establishing leaders to make sure things stay in order. That he is worried about these men not submitting to the authority of Paul and what he represents for the church. Because Paul is all about gospel, we need proper teaching, we need correct doctrine, and these guys have their own agenda. And they're not willing to submit to what God's teaching says. So he says we need guys that are going to
Let
give
me ask
proper
you a
teaching
question.
because yeah, go ahead.
This has been a really interesting thing to think about. I have a sort of a soul searching about it. because the head of the church is Jesus,
Right.
and the head of the wife is the husband, and it looks like the head of the church is also the priesthood.
Not
And
the
the head
head
of
of
the
the
body
head of the
is
church is Christ, but, oh, are you referring to, like, the local church, you mean?
yeah, yeah, that would
Okay.
be a good way to put that.
I
But
wouldn't use the
what?
term head, I would use the term shepherd, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, the original Greek separated head as in leader from head as in like physically the head of a body or the front in the charge into battle. Okay. That second one is the one I'm referring to. So
Hmm.
shepherd is an interesting way to put it. But I'm curious about the difference between saying I hold authority over someone and saying I'm better than they are. Like that's not what it means.
I don't think Paul would use that term because he also references himself as the chief of, so I don't think calling him better, I don't think Paul would ever use that term. I think what he would use is that I have this role that was given to me by Jesus Christ, and that doesn't make me better, but it does give me a role, and as that was established given to me by my Savior, by my God, I am going to fulfill that.
So the reason people are insubordinate is because they don't feel included. You know, they don't feel like they're equal with their authority.
I feel like this is something that would probably be better
Treated
for the
as
after study
subpar.
because I don't think that's necessarily going to be the issue here, and we'll get into it as we keep going through verse. We'll bring this up back up in the after study. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So we have insubordinate, right? We have this idea of rebellion, empty talkers and deceivers. What are empty talkers?
Look up head.
Good. I like that, Phoenix. They say nothing of value. Yep. I'll read this quote from one of the commentaries I was looking at. It says, the main idea was of a worship which produced no goodness of life. These people in Crete could talk glibly, but all their talk was ineffective in bringing anyone one step nearer goodness. Snake oil salesman. Yeah, that's probably pretty good. Oh, for deceivers.
Sorry, Scott. Can you repeat that last part? It brings them one step closer to what?
Uh, uh, these people in Crete could talk glibly, but all their talk was ineffective in bringing anyone one step nearer goodness. And then he kind of calls out a specific uh, type or group. He says, "Those of the circumcision party." Well, who are we talking about here?
They'd be Jews for one thing.
Yep, likely Jews. There's a specific term for these guys. Anybody remember what these guys were called? Pharisees. A lot of them were Galatians poster boys. Yes. Do we have the term that we have generally referred to them as? They're
But
called. Oh,
it's
shoot. Get into the right window. We called them the Judaizers.
mm,
These were guys that would go in would find churches, and they would enter them, and they would more or less affirm Jesus, but they would say that Jesus' work wasn't enough. You had to install certain institutions of the Jewish religion, like Old Testament law, like circumcision and whatnot, to supplement Christ's work. And so they were saying that Christ's work was insufficient. And so it was this corruption of the gospel because they were saying that Christ didn't do enough. And obviously, we know that Christ's work was once for all.
That doesn't make a lot of sense to me that it would be a corrupter of things. I mean, post Christ, it eventually was well understood that this was the case, the way it was meant to be. But pre Christ, it was pretty clear that they were following the law of Moses, and that was a good thing.
Yes, but what it was
So
that Christ came.
Judaizers were going back in time, not trying to change
Correct.
the future.
Yes, the Judaizers, what they were doing was they were looking at it and saying, you know, they what they were more or less doing were
It's more like
nullifying
they
Christ's
hadn't
words.
been converted yet.
They were
They hadn't
looking at
been
Christ's
converted
work on the
away
cross.
from it.
Give me a second. What they were saying was that Christ's work on the cross, when Jesus said, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it and enter into a new phase of God's relationship with man. We had the law
Right.
before, but the law could not redeem. We know that from Romans. And so what Jesus does is he fulfills the law, thereby fulfilling its requirements and extending his righteousness to mankind, those that would accept him. That's the
Yeah, that's all
shoot, the
correct.
transition
Not
of the
not denying
transition of
that.
righteousness. Yeah. But what these Judaizers
Correct.
were doing was trying to add on, the Old Testament when scripture's like, no, we don't need that. And this is as Kev said, this is what Galatians is so much about. It's like, why are you Galatians going back to this? This is, Christ fulfilled this. We're done with that. We don't need to subject ourselves in the same way to the law. We now fulfill the law of Christ. The Bible doesn't need DLC, Phoenix. Dude.
It's certainly a popular. It's certainly a popular contention that you're bringing up there.
Oh yeah, we're pinning that. No, darn it, Kes.
Beat you to it.
She got to it before I did. I was pinning that in real time. Oh, all right. Oh man. Okay, I'm keeping you guys. It's past 10 o'clock. Oh, do we want to pause here because I've got some more things to say. I don't want to keep you guys for forever. Do we want to pause here and we'll pick up and we'll finish off the chapter next time? Because I know that Wise Rat doesn't have to work tomorrow, but I do.
I mean, I'm just sitting here doing repeats and listening, so it's fine with me.
Okay.
Does anyone need to go? Sounds like Scribe needs to go.
It would be good sooner than later. Just because, like I said, I do work tomorrow. But also I'm a little wary of the whole thing with the tooth. I'm feeling fine, but I don't want to exacerbate anything that can bring. So
It's
if it's
sad to
all
say
right,
goodbye.
yeah, if it's all right with you guys, I think we'll cut it there. That leaves us off in verse 10. And then in 2 weeks we'll finish off chapter 1. Okay?
Appreciate your time.
Mhm.
Definitely.
There's good stuff here, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm loving what I'm seeing from Titus. I'm loving the discussion that you guys are having. This is really good stuff, and I don't want to rush this or give it any less than full effort, because this is really beneficial, really positive. You guys get as much out of this, and I want to be able to get as much out of it as I can. Let's go ahead and call it there. Phoenix, you can go ahead and stop the recording, and then we will take prayer requests.